thank you all for being here with me once again on my podcast called A Legacy of Love, Un Legado de Amor, that's already there on YouTube. Continue following me. But today is another wonderful day. I have Michael with me from UK, and he also has a story. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Annie. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here with me. It is such a pleasure and a blessing to have you today. We would love to hear a little bit about yourself, what you do, uh, and a little bit of your story.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Michael from the UK. I'm a social worker. I've been a social worker, well, for a long time, more years than sometimes I care to remember. But over 30 years, I've been a social worker. And the person you see before you now is very comfortable in the courts and working with children. I've worked with children for, as I say, more years than I care to remember, at least 30 plus years. Um, as I say, the person you see before you is comfortable and confident now, giving evidence, being in the court, going through difficult situations. But I wasn't always that way. If I was to take you back some 30 odd years when I first started my career, I was working with a little girl. She was a 3-year-old girl and her parents. And very soon realized that I didn't like going to see the family. Now, it was nothing to do with the little girl. The little girl was fine. But I didn't like the way the parents were. I hadn't fully put it all together, but I could tell that they detested me. Now, I didn't know if it was personal. I didn't know if it was what it was, whether I'd done something particular. I don't think it was necessarily personal. I think they just didn't like social workers and didn't want anyone being there, being having any authority over them or anyone looking at what they were doing. Anyhow, I remember a summer, it was one summer's day, and believe it or not, we do have some nice weather in the UK. Very rare, it's not good. We don't have a lot of it, but this was a nice hot summer day. And when we have nice hot summer days, I feel buoyant, I feel alive, I love getting up. But this particular day, I didn't feel that same joy. I felt weighed down. I felt ill at ease. I felt uncomfortable. And I knew it's because I was going to have to go and see that family, which I had to do, although I didn't want to do it, which I had to do because I was a social worker for that little child. So on this particular day, I found myself going to the family. Went into the building. I went up the elevator, took me to the floor because it was a bit of a high rise block of flats. And I got outside. As I got outside the elevator, I kind of tried to steel myself because I knew that I was going to go through a process when I went inside there. So I did my best to steel myself, knocked on the door. They came, opened the door, and just went away, sort of thing. And as I stepped through the threshold, it was like walking into a different world. It was like, I don't know if you remember the Twilight Zone, and if your audience remembers the Twilight Zone, it's like maybe if you've got a younger audience, they may not remember, but it's kind of like a little bit of a horror movie. And you go into this place, which is totally not what you're used to at all. So I stepped into this place, and the decor was very poor. The furnishing was sparsely furnished. The carpets were ripped up. As I went into the flat, the parents were over the other side of the room. They didn't look at me. They didn't talk to me. I never saw them smile at any time did they smile. Not in my presence. The father I never gave me eye contact. The mother would look at me, but she had a continual snarl on her face, as if someone was always doing something to her. So she never looked happy. She always looked kind of grotesquely annoyed about something. The only person in that flat who gave me any welcome or any degree of welcome was the little child, little 3-year-old girl. And she was in a kind of playpen. She was always in this kind of playpen. I don't know why she was always in the playpen, because she was 3 years old and she could walk. she could play. Interestingly, I recall I never saw her actually playing in the playpen. She was just in the pen, holding onto the rails. And I remember thinking, the way she holds onto these wooden rails were like how you see some people holding onto jail bars. They hold onto it like that. And what hit me about her was that she was always, apart from the fact that she always looked grubby. Her dress was never, it was never always had marks on it. Her face, you could see the stains of where you see the tears had been rolling down her face. And you could see the tear stains had mingled with the snot on her nose, and it was all around her mouth. And she just looked like she needed to be washed and cared and given some tender, loving care and attention. She really looked like that. But what hit me about her was her eyes. Her eyes were always trained on me. She was looking at me all the time. She didn't look at anyone else. She wasn't looking at her mum. She wasn't looking at her dad. She wasn't looking around the room at anyone. Her eyes were always just looking at me, no one else but me. And that never made sense to me. I never got that. Anyhow, one day I received a call from my manager bright and early one weekday morning. Now, my manager never rings me in the mornings, never rings me, never rung me. She's never rung me before. But I got this call this morning, this particular morning, and she said to me, Michael, could you come into work as soon as possible? There's been a tragedy on one of the cases. I thought, tragedy, what did that mean? Maybe someone's been hurt. Maybe someone's just been attacked or something like that. That's what went through my mind. Anyhow, I went to work as soon as I could. When I got there, she said to me, Michael, do you want to sit down? I said, no, I don't want to sit down. Just tell me what happened, please. Tell me what it is. Because by this time, I was just anxious. She took a deep breath and then she said the words that changed my world, really, that turned my life upside down. She said the little girl had been killed in a horrific fashion by the parent, by one of the parents. And that meant then, that meant so many things. I knew that I didn't know all things because I was still new to social work, but I knew that was going to be a massive thing. But then I also knew that I was going to have to go to court. I was going to have to go to court for the first time, and I was going to have to tell them, and I was going to have to be asked questions about what I did and what I didn't do to protect and save that little girl. And I knew there'd be all sorts of questions that I would have to somehow answer. What was also going through me at the time was that apart from my personal life, which wasn't great at the time, because I was going through, well, I was close on going to divorce, although divorce wasn't talked about at the time, but things weren't going well between me and my wife at the time. I was also aware that my colleagues, a number of my colleagues, some of whom were quite, were supportive, but a number of people distanced themselves from me. And they distanced themselves from me. I understood, in hindsight, I can understand fully why they did it. It wasn't a pleasant thing. It wasn't something that made me feel good, but I can understand it because as a social worker, the worst thing ever possible, the worst possible thing that could happen was the child that you are the allocated social worker for dying or being killed. That is the worst possible thing that can happen. So obviously people were distancing themselves because they didn't want to be associated with it. They didn't want other people to think that they were part of that in any way. So it was a very lonely time. Now I had to go to court, and probably for most of your audience, they may not know London. There's a big court in London called the Royal Courts of Justice. It's a massive building. It's a massive stone building. Picture a cathedral, a stone cathedral. When you go in there, when you get past the electric barriers, when they're patting you down to make sure you don't have a weapon or anything else like that, you get through there. The first thing you notice is just how cold it is. It's physically cold. The temperature's cold. Even on a nice warm day, it's cold because it's stone. It's a massive building. So it's cold in there. But it's also cold emotionally. It's also cold in the way courts aren't warm places. Courts aren't places that are nice and lovey-dovey. Courts are places where there's a lot of conflict. Courts are adversarial. So on this day, I had to find my way. There were many courts in that place, so I had to find the particular court that I had to go to. When I got there, eventually I was placed in a witness box, and I was placed in the box, which is about. It doesn't give you much room. There's not much room in there. You can sit in there comfortably, but you can sit in there, all right. But then there is not a lot of room either side, so you kind of feel, kind of feel a bit trapped. Now, perhaps you may know, or you may have experienced, or that might resonate with you. Sometimes you might have experienced being in a position where you feel trapped, caged, shut in. That's how I felt. I felt caged in, and I wanted to go. I wanted to be anywhere else than there, anywhere, but I couldn't because the judge was telling me, you know, that's where I had to stay until I was released. So I had to stay there, whether I wanted to be there or not. This was my little cage, and that's why I had to stay. Whilst I was there, one of the barristers, was throwing questions at me. He was throwing or firing questions at me, question after question. I couldn't answer these questions. I wasn't prepared emotionally or professionally for the questions that were coming at me. And they were coming at me thick and fast. And all I could do was open my mouth and nothing could drip out except stutters and stumbling on and ums and ahs and, silence. So I looked like a complete idiot. And whilst that was going on, at one stage, I kind of looked up and looked around the room. I thought, this isn't right. This is wrong. This shouldn't be happening. Someone here must care. Someone here must do something about it. Someone here must want to do something, must want to help me. I thought someone must rescue me. Someone must care enough to save me from all of this. But as I looked around the room, there was no one there to save me. All I saw was stone hard faces looking at me with incredulity, looking at me like how can I be so senseless? How can I be so useless? How can I be so pathetic? That's
I,
all I got. Stone look,
I'm sorry to
nothing
interrupt, but
else.
I do have like a question as all this is coming and it's unraveling. Um, did you see the little girl several times? Did
I
you
saw I saw her a few times. I can't remember how many times now, maybe 3, 4 times, maybe.
was it several months that you were there before this happens? Or, I mean,
I,
they
c-
would
I c- I-
they would
it's
have
a
to
long
have
time
that,
ago.
yeah,
Sorry.
have that in consideration. I mean, as they're sitting there and looking at you with these horrible faces that you mentioned, um, didn't they recognize that you had just seen her a couple of times, or it was not a long time, I would say, or was it a long time that you were seeing
Was
this little girl?
It wasn't a long time. Maybe it's a few months. I don't even know if it was a few months. It may have been a few months. I can't remember now. All I can say is that you see, there was no, and I don't think it'd be even that much different today. It's not. The thing is, when you're a social worker, what society wants is for you to save the child. That's what they want. They do not care whether you are experienced. They do not care whether you've got extenuating circumstances. They do not care if you are naive. They do not care if there are circumstances which might make that difficult or more difficult for you. All they want is to know is whether you save that child or not. That's all they're interested in. Right?
That is
So as
very
I look,
sad.
sorry,
Very sad. That is very sad because you where I believe you were just starting doing this. You were new to all this. And by the way, we only have 10 more minutes. That's what
Okay.
the thing is telling me. But what really matters here is that they don't seem to really care and have that, you know, loving heart of understanding your position and maybe your limitations. I believe you also have limitations as your job role. Um, and definitely I'm going to have you again for the second part, or we're going to have to record it again, just a couple of seconds so we
Yeah.
could finish it all together because it's so much. Um, how were you able to finally get out of this? Uh,
I think how I got out of it is is that I decided that it was so painful. I mean, yes, please have me back because there's much more I want to say. But it was so painful that there's a part of me that definitely decided that that was not going to, never going to, I was never going to allow that to happen to me again. So, although I couldn't tell my story for years, I decided that I was going to make sure that that couldn't happen to me again. So I decided I would go back to court time and time again so that I got skilled and so that I was able to defend myself in court properly so that no barrister or anyone else, not even the judge, could make me feel the way I felt at that time. And I did
did
that.
you have closure of the little girl? Did you really end up finding out what truly happened? Did they ever give you that opportunity? Because it was just so much for you to process, and at the same time, did they give you a little more information?
I know who killed the little girl. I don't, I know that it was the father, and the father went to prison, I suppose, for life. Um, I would also say that whatever I did get, I was traumatized. So
Yes.
when I look back at it now, I had what all I knew is that the father killed the child in probably a rage, so attack of rage, and I think he bashed the head on the floor or something like that. But I don't know everything now, and I imagine whatever I was told at the time, it was part of my trauma. I just everything the child's death, going to court, having to deal with it, it was all too much, all of it, and yeah, it was a very difficult time. But I made the decision somewhere along the line. And sometimes you're not even aware. I wasn't even aware. It's like sometimes it's like it obviously was a conscious decision, but I wasn't aware of it.
Mhm.
Something told me that I'm going to go back there, or some part of me, somewhere inside me, said, "You're going to go back there, and you're going to make sure that that never happens to you again." Right? And that's what I did.
Well, Michael, I am like really, really touched. And most definitely, we're going to continue this session right now. Um, and I have to say that I really respect you. I really honor the fact that you wanted to do things the right way. And most of all, the love and the care and the compassion that I see in your heart, that is just very special. And I'm glad that that did not change you for the bad. It changed you for the very best, to be a better human being, to be more mindful of what's around you. And I thank you for that. And we will continue this recording. Thank you.
Thank you.